are very excited to have Planning Division Director Heather Stouder here today to give an update on many of the different activities in the city right now. She's going to give a quick presentation, but really wants to open it up to question and answer from all of you that are working directly in economic development. Heather, good morning. I hope you're doing well, and thank you for being with us. So again, Heather's going to give a presentation. If you have questions, we're just going to open it up. Either I can ask the questions in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand. The raise hand function, when we're at time, is in the reaction section, and if updated on Zoom, and you can hit the raise hand function, and then I will call. We really do want your questions from Heather. Right, Heather? We want questions?
We do, yes.
Yes, we do. So please think of your questions before, but Heather's going to start with the presentation. Welcome, Heather. How are you this morning?
I'm great. Thank you so much, Jason. You have such great energy for these 8 a.m. meetings. So I feel more energized now, certainly.
My wife says it's hyperactivity. I think she might be right, though.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. See a lot of familiar faces. My colleague Bill Fruling is here too. Hello, Bill. And I think many of you probably have heard me speak about what I'm going to talk about this morning a few times. And so I want to apologize to those of you who have heard this before. Looking at Bill Connors, I think Bill's probably heard this about 6 times now, but others as well. So apologies for any redundancy, but I want to take you through, I've included a few new things as well. I'm going to focus today mostly on the proposed changes to the city's zoning ordinance related to residential densities and conditional use thresholds. But first I'll frame it with the new Housing Forward package that the mayor has put forward. So I'll go ahead and get started here and then try to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. All right, so as many of you know, the council, actually 5 alders have sponsored, 5 alders and the mayor have sponsored a collection of zoning changes to support additional housing in the city. And it's been unanimously supported by the city's Housing Strategy Committee and Plan Commission. On March 30th, this legislation was actually referred to the May 18th council meeting. And so that's our best estimate now as to when this will get back to the council, along with the 8 new alders that we're working feverishly to try to bring up to speed on this issue. Let's see. For some reason, I cannot advance it. Let's see.
Actually, it advanced right at the last second before you took it down.
Just on a delay. Okay.
There we go. We see introduction and policy context.
Okay, great. I do too. Just waiting for the next slide to come up. Well, this is embarrassing, folks. This hasn't happened to me before. I'm used to doing PowerPoints. Let's see. Okay. I'm not sure what button worked for that, but well, I want to frame this first in a new package that the mayor has put forward just this week called Housing Forward. And to be quite honest, this is something that the mayor and key staff had been working on pre-COVID, just immediately pre-COVID. I think that the intent was to release this package of housing-related initiatives pre-COVID, and then COVID hit, and you all understand what that brought to the city and the world. But I think what Housing Forward does is it really sort of ties a bow on the many things that the city is doing around housing. We know as a city that we need more housing, period. We know that we need more deeply affordable housing throughout the city, focused on the lowest income households in the city. Third, we really want to, as a city, do what we can, and it's limited, but we want to do what we can as a city to combat displacement through, when gentrification occurs. We want to try to get ahead of displacement and mitigate that to the best of our ability as a city, working with partners. Fourth, we want to ensure that folks can stay in their homes. That's pretty closely related to 3. And then finally, a lot of strategies to work to end homelessness in the city. today we'll focus with the zoning ordinance changes really on number one. They're really focused on increasing housing choice and paving the way for more housing, period, in the city. And so within number one, digging just a little deeper into the housing forward document that the mayor released. Again, we know that we're behind with regard to the pace of more housing to keep up with the demand as the city continues to grow. And we've honed in on the need to create approximately 10,000 new housing units over the next 5 years to meet our needs. And within that, we want to focus on 3 specific elements. We want to implement adopted plans through the zoning code. I won't go into detail on that today, but this has to do with the concept of proactive rezoning. And when we complete a planning process that recommends conversion of, say, industrial land to allow for more residential, we want to try to get ahead of that as a city and proactively rezone those properties, if practical, to accommodate the residential growth we want to see. Second, and this is the one we'll really focus on today, is adjustments to the zoning code. And then third, some of the adjustments we've already focused on. We've made zoning changes to support more townhomes, more housing cooperatives. We're working probably later on in this year to look at ADUs, or backyard cottages, within the zoning code. Looking back a little further, I just want to stress that a lot of what we're doing is just explicitly recommended in previously adopted plans and reports, including the 2018 City of Madison Comprehensive Plan. What we heard throughout that process leading up to the adoption of the plan, probably the loudest thing we heard from all facets of the community, is that we need more housing choices in Madison. And that one of the main housing goals then is to provide a range of quality and affordable housing opportunities throughout the city. Now, obviously, and this is something that's important to continue to stress to housing advocates and decision makers, the city only constructs a very, very slim amount of housing in the city. All of you are familiar with that. We really rely on our private sector and nonprofit sector partners to deliver the housing that Madison needs. Madison really takes on a multitude of initiatives that are all much better laid out in this housing forward package. But the way that I've divided it here is simply we have a slew of funding efforts that are absolutely impacting city budgets. And those have to do with the Affordable Housing Fund, with direct assistance for home ownership, land banking, so proactively purchasing land in order to hold it for affordable housing development. And then on the other side, we have more budget neutral efforts that are around our regulatory framework. What can we do to examine the zoning code to make the types of housing that Madison needs easier to move forward with? And today we'll focus on the conditional use thresholds and the modest density adjustments that are proposed. Strategies and actions within the comp plan. Strategy 2 here, support development of a wider mix of housing types, sizes, and costs. So as most of you are aware, we've seen a lot of very large apartment buildings and mixed use buildings, and still a steady pace of single family homes. We don't see a lot in the middle, and we want to try to do what we can to support that missing middle housing, the smaller scale multifamily residential housing. And just, again, increasing the amount of available housing is critical. And here's the explicit recommendation in the comprehensive plan to do just what has been proposed, and that's to make adjustments to the conditional use thresholds to increase allowable densities. This is not anything I expect you to take content from, but I just want to show it as an image here. We're focused on working on many things at once from our comprehensive plan neighborhoods and housing section. Highlighted in green are the recommendations from that section that pertain explicitly to this ordinance amendment. And then in yellow are the other things that the city is working on at the same time. Importantly, we had a more focused document that was adopted in late 2019. That's the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. And folks on the Housing Strategy Committee worked very hard preparing this document with our staff from the Community Development Division. In that document as well, again, don't worry about the content necessarily here, but just as an image, want to show you that we're working on, in green are the highlighted recommendations from that document that pertain explicitly to this ordinance amendment. And then in yellow are the other recommendations the city's working on as well. This is a group that I probably don't need to focus much on the next few slides for, and I'll just fly through them. Well, that's interesting. Oh no. As you know, we're expecting approximately 70,000 people, 40,000 new households over the next 20 years. And especially in the recession, we really fell behind in our production of housing to meet that demand. We're still trying to get up to a normal and healthy vacancy rate of approximately 5%. And these are just the average listed rents over time for 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. Now, importantly, when we take a look at racial segregation of housing choice, these two maps are just telling. They really, really hit you. And I don't want to claim that the ordinance amendments that are proposed will absolutely solve this problem, or that they're completely focused on race and housing choice, but I certainly think they're on the right side of it. They're going to be helping to provide more housing choices to combat this issue. And I'll show you these two maps. So what we did, and this relates to 2018 data, so we looked at your average income white household, so your median income white household, and took a look at the median rent of rental housing all across the city by census tract. And if you look at the median rent levels by census tract and the median income household, these are the census tracts, so basically all the city, where your median income white household can choose to live, assuming that they spend no more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And so again, if you're a median income white household, you have choices to live anywhere basically within the city. Very different map when you look at the median income Black household in the city. And this changed a little bit from 2016 to 2018, where we had maybe 2 census tracts where the median income Black household could afford the median rent apartment. In 2018, again, if you're a median income white household, you can pretty much choose to live anywhere you'd like to in the city. Median income Black household, virtually no choice if you're looking at what that median rent is and limiting your rent to 30% of your income. What we expect in the future is more housing at all scales, including this very large scale. While this is not the focus of the ordinance amendments that I'll go a little bit more in depth on, we fully expect and need large scale mixed use and multifamily buildings to continue in Madison. And those will be, placed in areas that we're planning for it, that are appropriately zoned, et cetera. So I think we'll definitely welcome and continue to want to see larger scale development. We'll also continue to see more small scale single family development, particularly on the city's periphery. But what these ordinance changes are really focused on is kind of that missing middle, the small and mid scale that we haven't seen a lot of in recent years. And I think it's important here to note that not only do we want to see this scale of development, but we also want to see a broader diversity of developers, some who may be able to enter the Madison market when they're looking to develop at this scale that perhaps wouldn't enter the Madison market today because of the complexity and lack of predictability in the review process. So really, these are some examples of the scale that I think these ordinances focus on. So, attached townhomes, small multifamily. And now I just want to provide a quick summary of what the changes are and where in the city the zoning districts are that they would pertain to. So really, for these changes, we're looking at a small area within the city as a whole, about 7% of the city's land area, where we want to, with these changes, change our conditional use threshold slightly, and also make small adjustments to allow for greater densities. This is a quick look at where the multifamily residential zoning districts are within the city. So this takes up about 5% of the city's land area. And just for context, the black circles here show recent housing that has been approved in the city. So you can sort of see within these zoning districts, where are we seeing housing over the last 6 or 5 years being approved? You can see some really small circles here in the Isthmus area, smaller projects. Then the larger projects have the larger circles on them. So that's just a look at where we're seeing growth within these specific zoning districts. The density adjustments that are being recommended are exactly in line with the city's comprehensive plan. And so, we're ratcheting up slightly. I'm talking about 30–40% increase in the allowable densities within these multifamily districts. We're not talking about a 4-fold increase or a dramatic upzoning. And I think that's been an issue that's been of concern to some policymakers, that if we dramatically upzone areas, what could that do to land costs? That's something that we're certainly aware of and cognizant of, but I want to stress that here in Madison, with these specific proposals, they are quite modest. Again, it's 30–40% increases in density, and exactly in line with the density ranges proposed in the city's comprehensive plan. When we turn to our mixed use and commercial districts, this is really where we've seen a large amount of our growth. And so it's 2% of the city's land area, yet we've seen over a quarter of the multifamily housing approved since 2016 has been in these districts. So again, 2% of the land area, about a quarter of our growth in multifamily housing since 2016. And you can see here, there's really pretty decent geographic distribution throughout the city. We're not seeing, all of this happening on the Isthmus, for instance, which I think has been another concern, that we're seeing all of this happen in central areas. We're really seeing a pretty decent geographic distribution of growth in our mixed use districts throughout the city. And when you look at our city's growth priorities as laid out in the comprehensive plan, again, the comprehensive plan really recommends growing in nodes and corridors to create more active and complete neighborhoods throughout the city. And where the circles are shown and where the wide arrows are shown along corridors is really where we want to accommodate a majority of our growth in the next 20 years. And if you just look at how the mixed use districts overlay onto those, onto those activity centers, you can see there's a lot of overlap between where our mixed use districts are. So where we're trying to make these zoning changes and drive growth, again, is very consistent with the comprehensive plan recommendations for where we want to accommodate growth. Again, just a quick look at the density changes that are being recommended in the mixed use districts. They are in line with the recommended density ranges in the city's comprehensive plan. And so just a little bit about, permitted versus conditional uses. Again, most of you are very, very familiar with this, either through your own experience with the development process or other experience. But what we want to do is allow for more multifamily residential to be constructed by right, to allow for more predictability in the development process. And this is really with a focus on the small to mid-scale sizes of multifamily development. And so, for instance, and I don't have a slide on this, I should, but for instance, in one of the mixed use districts, the neighborhood mixed use district, the recommendation would be to allow for a 12-unit residential building to be done by right. Today, for instance, in that same district, one could only construct up to a 4-unit multifamily building by right. And so we want to slightly increase what can be done by right in that neighborhood mixed use district. In our traditional shopping street district, which you'll find along Willie Street, Monroe Street, that in that district, the number would be 24. So we want to propose for developers to be allowed to build a 24-unit building by right. And then finally, the Commercial Corridor Transitional, or CCT district, which you see along portions of East Washington Avenue, some along Cottage Grove Road, some along University Avenue, that number would be a little higher. 36 unit building would be one that could be pursued by right. But really, you know, for the most part, the larger scale mixed use and multifamily development would still go through the conditional use process. Again, we want to focus on that small to mid scale and allow for an easier, more predictable path for the smaller scale development to move forward. And what that means, if you look at our growth over the past, or our approvals, I should say, over the past 5 years, we've approved about 11,000 housing units during that time. And I think the changes from conditional to permitted use would have impacted under 4% of those. Now, we certainly want that number to go up. And I think that, you know, intuitively, we think and hope that that number can go up because we'll be providing more predictability and a better environment for new and smaller scale developers to move forward with projects that they otherwise may have walked away from due to concerns about the lack of predictability in the process. Finally, and this is something that is an important change, but perhaps not as impactful, there's a very strange requirement today in the zoning code that requires the dispersion of 2-family, 3-family, 4-family dwellings in some of our zoning districts. And you know, if a developer were to come in and want to, for instance, add a 3rd unit to a building that is within 300 feet of another 3-family building, they would need to seek conditional use review. So we want to eliminate that dispersion requirement and make it more straightforward to construct very small multifamily buildings in some of our zoning districts. And these are the areas where this dispersion clause is today and where it would be removed based on this proposal. I want to stop here now for some Q&A. I'll let you know that I do have slides that show some images of either recently approved buildings or sites that could perhaps be redevelopment sites in the future. So I have some examples and visuals that I could share, but I want to stop and stop share screen here and just open it up for some Q&A.
Thank you, Heather. We do already have some questions. So if you have a question, either send it in the question through the chat. I can ask it if you don't want to ask it, or raise your hand through the reactions function, raise your hand. First up, Susan. Good morning, Susan. How are you?
Good morning. Hello, everyone. And hi, Heather and Bill. It's nice to see both of you, sort of seeing you. I have a question about, okay, besides, and thanks for that presentation, it was excellent. And besides the what you're doing with the zoning code, I did want to ask you about other efforts that the city is putting forward to help with this affordable housing shortage. Like, could you talk about the use of TIF and then also naturally occurring affordable housing and that effort and what the city is doing with the NOAA effort? Because I mean, personally, I think we need all the tools. We need all the tools that we can in the toolbox to really make a difference. So, if you could talk about both TIF and NOAA, please.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about it. I would say that, you know, we have a really great staff team across PCED, the Department of Planning, Community, and Economic Development, and my colleagues Lynette Rhodes, who's in the Community Development Division. And also then folks in economic development might have some better answers to questions that come up about these things, but I can give it my best shot here. I've worked a lot with Lynette in recent weeks as we talk with decision makers about these ordinances and where they lie within the bigger picture. So for our affordable housing piece, as you know, the city's doing many things, the use of the Affordable Housing Fund very aggressively, et cetera. But you asked specifically about TIF. And what I want to mention, my economic development colleagues are working hard to utilize TIF in some different ways. One of which is to be able to use TIF for affordable housing. That can be difficult because, as you know, TIF relies on the generation of increment in order to basically, you know, make up for what the TIF is supporting in the first place. But one very innovative thing that, that we're starting to do more as a city is to utilize TIF for land banking. So looking out for possibilities for land purchase in order to hold certain properties for the development of affordable housing in the long run. And TIF can be used for land purchase. It can be used outside of the TIF district itself. It can be used within a half mile to purchase property. And so we're starting to look more actively, more proactively at opportunities for land banking in our in and around our TIF districts that are very healthy, that are doing well, that have extra funds to spend. Another really innovative thing that's happening around TIF right now is a more frequent use of donor TIDs. And so when you have a TIF district that's doing very, very well, and it's getting close to closure, funds from that TID can be donated to another TIF district. And so, we're looking at that specifically with regard to South Madison and some land banking efforts and efforts to prop up affordable housing in South Madison. So those are two things that I'll mention right away, and they're sort of indirect. So it's not necessarily using TIF in an affordable housing project, although that's possible, but it's utilizing TIF for land banking and looking broadly across the city at ways to donate TIF funds from one district to another. And then with regard to the naturally occurring affordable housing, I would need to talk with Lynette a little bit more and get back to you on that. I know that, there's certainly, they, meaning colleagues in community development, are working very closely with our nonprofit housing developers and folks who already own naturally occurring but unsubsidized affordable housing to try to maintain that over time. I think that one of the ideas is, could the city be a partner in helping to transfer ownership of naturally occurring affordable housing into nonprofit hands for long-term in order to ensure long-term maintenance of that housing as affordable. And so I think that that's probably the question that you asked that I'm least well prepared to address, but I know that that's at least one thing that that CDD staff is talking about with our nonprofit housing developers.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you, Susan. Next up, we've got Bill. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Jason. Good morning, Heather. I want to share with the folks, so this is more of a comment than a question for Heather, but Heather can correct me if I got this wrong. Based on emails I've had going back and forth with Heather about this the proposed ordinance. It's a feature of it that I didn't realize that I think is really exciting. In the mixed use districts right now, it really isn't, there isn't much of any provision for doing any sort of all housing, not mixed use buildings. Certainly not by right, but even as a conditional use. And the proposed ordinance would actually allow a developer to choose to do an 100% housing building in a mixed use district, either as a conditional use or as a permitted use, depending on how many units it is. And it would not have to meet the requirement to have some retail or commercial use on the ground floor on the street face. That street face requirement to have commercial space there only applies if the developer chooses to do a mixed use building. Heather, am I getting that right?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So I want to just touch on that for 2 minutes here. So in today's zoning code, we have what many of us would consider, I think, even a perverse incentive to do mixed use. And here's the way that it works today. As Bill mentioned, you can do some purely residential construction in our mixed use districts, but anything that's purely residential would need a conditional use today. And the density limitations, so the lot area you would need per dwelling unit aren't really high enough in order to support, practically support purely residential development. There are some exceptions to that. We've seen some purely residential development happen, but it's been, I can count on one hand the projects that have happened in our mixed use districts over the past 5 or 10 years that are purely residential. What these code changes would do is allow for purely residential development on the small scale, so the 12 unit, the 24, the 36, depending on the zoning district, to move forward as a permitted use with slight adjustments to the lot area requirements or density limitations, so that they're more in line with what you'd practically expect to deliver on a property. Now, what we still have in the zoning code is that when you do a mixed use building with a commercial first floor, you have no density limitation whatsoever per se. I mean, you're going through the conditional use process often, and of course the Plan Commission will look at the recommended densities in adopted plans, et cetera. But the zoning code itself has no density limitation if one moves forward with a mixed use building. So that sort of incentive is still there, but we've tried to correct it, well, I think, with these proposed changes to make it easier to do some especially small scale residential within our mixed use district, where we ostensibly have a lot of commercial square footage on first floors that's not being leased, as you know. I mean, I think we've perhaps incentivized it so much that it's been overbuilt. And what we really want to focus on is, again, that smaller scale developer who wouldn't be able to carry the costs of an unleased commercial space for 5 years. We want to let those smaller scale buildings move forward as purely residential buildings.
Excellent. There's clamoring to get to the other slides, but there are a couple quick questions I think we have before. A good question is, Heather, what happens if a project meets the new requirements in terms of size, but the site is also in a design district requiring UDC approval? Would it still get approved by right?
So no, great question. Thank you. So we can't, through these zoning changes, we can't circumvent other boards and commissions like the Urban Design Commission or the Landmarks Commission. So if a property lies within a local historic district or urban design district, it would still need to go to those commissions for approval.
Perfect. A couple other quick questions here. With the zoning code changes, how do you think success should be measured? Is there a goal yet? Number of units in a building under 50 units, number of months for approvals? What are the measures of success?
Yeah, great question. I saw that come across in the chat as well. So we have a mechanism in place to track a host of things with regard to the scale of projects. So one thing we would track is, are we seeing more small scale, quote, missing middle housing delivered over time? We don't have a good baseline to draw from because we've been working with the same sort of zoning code system for years, even many, many years ago when everything was done as a planned development. And so I think, in some ways, this would be a first for Madison to allow some smaller scale multifamily to occur by right. And we would be tracking that. Are we seeing a greater proportion of our total housing done at that small scale? So are we seeing more 12, 20 unit buildings than we have in the past? So that's one thing we'd measure. And we would certainly be measuring, this isn't necessarily a quantitative thing, but qualitatively, are we seeing new developers? And are those developers coming from a more diverse pool? Are we seeing developers who are people of color, more female developers, et cetera? So that's something we can track that's, again, not necessarily numeric, but very important to us. What I don't have, and we've given some thought to this, and I've heard this question, is we don't have a goal that's set, like a number that we must reach. I think that admittedly that, this is opening up. You can debate about whether it's going far enough or not, but it's opening up a new way of doing things, and we want to be able to track the results and make sure that it's effective.
Perfect, thank you. I think also just the diversity of developers. You're also at the same time piloting the ACRE program here in Madison, which
yes,
is actively working to help with you and Matt Wachter to make sure we create mentors and mentorships here in systems and programs. So I think that should be acknowledged as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, within our economic development division, a current ACRE student has just been hired as the manager of the city's Office of Business Resources. And
Yes.
so Saran Oak, we really look forward to Saran's contributions and connections and working, planning and economic development, working together to more proactively reach out to a more diverse set of developers. So I think that that's very important to mention. And finally, I do want to say, there's no silver bullet to our housing issue, as I mentioned up front, but one of the really important things we want to track over time is how our housing costs match the income levels of Madison's population. And so, how many households can afford housing in Madison using 30% of their income or less? And so that's something that we need to track over time. And I don't think that anyone is making the claim that these ordinances in and of themselves are going to solve that issue. But I certainly think that they are providing a way to move in the right direction. And the concern is if we don't do things like this, would the existing conditions be exacerbated?
One last question before we get to the slides here. Question coming from Nathan. I am in a TRC2, which is either a zoning code or a character in Star Wars. That was a good joke. Admit it. It was a good joke. Nobody's not. One of you is laughing. Nathan's laughing. Thank you. Most of Dungeon Monroe and Vilas are also TRC2. These changes exclude these affluent neighborhoods so that they only allow new single-family homes by right in TRC2. How would a neighborhood petition to rezone these neighborhoods to allow by right 2, 3, and 4 plexes and ADUs be received by the mayor and the city? I'm assuming opposition from the traditional neighborhood associations and aligned alders, who presumably exclude these districts as for the new changes. Thanks, and he would love to sign the petition, he says.
Great question. So I think we as staff have heard from several alders actually with support for moving forward with at least a piece of that. And that's to look at allowing for a much more permissive environment for accessory dwelling units in single family neighborhoods. Some are interested in, and one thing we've thought about a lot as staff is allowing by right the inclusion of an internal ADU. So let's just say you finish your basement as a second dwelling unit and turn that single family home into basically a 2-unit building. That's something that I think there's a broad support for. There's some support for allowing the garage conversion to an ADU, the detached garage conversion to an ADU by right. There's even some support by alders for removing the clause that's in our code right now that requires for the property owner to either live in the single family home or the ADU. Right now, you must owner occupy the site in order to do an accessory dwelling unit. And that condition runs with the property over time. There's interest from some alders in re-examining that. And I think a few alders are interested in sort of, I'll call it the Minneapolis approach, the piece where we're really changing single family zoning, eliminating it altogether to allow for the 2 and 3 units and maybe 4 units in our single family districts. That's about 25% of the city. And so that's, it's a large swath geographically. It remains to be seen whether a change like that would cut into our housing needs as significantly as allowing for more growth in our multifamily and mixed use districts. But I can say that there's not complete opposition to moving forward with something like that. We're hearing a lot of questions from alders along those lines, and I think we'll at least be taking up the ADU issue later this year.
Excellent, thank you. I think go back to your slides and see if we have any more time for a few more questions at the end. Sound good, Heather?
Yeah, sure thing. Let me pull up here. Okay, once again, see if I can get them to advance. I'm glad I have a kind group. Thanks for the grace and patience. It's really funny.
Yeah, I mean, Anne and
I've
I
not had this problem before.
We could do a duet or something. Anne, do you know any songs while we're waiting for the side dance? My jokes are particularly terrible this morning. Very dad-esque.
I'll try this in a different way. Okay.
And we can certainly see it there, and it comes up in a pretty good size too, Heather.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. I think I'll leave it at this scale, if that's okay, just to avoid any issues.
Thank you, Heather.
So working through some recently approved projects, just wanted to go through from the very smallest scale to a larger scale and mention the note of whether these would be conditional or permitted in the future. So this is one on the Isthmus. It's in the TRV2, Traditional Residential Varied 2 District. And it's a 4-unit, 2-building residential complex, because it's more than one building, on a double lot, 8,700 square foot lot. And so a solution like this would actually remain a conditional use because there's more than one building on a lot, but it's exactly the scale that we'd like to see more of. And with the changes to the density limitations, a 5th unit could be added to this lot. So that's the order of magnitude we're talking about. Right now, 4 units could be accommodated on a lot this size. With the changes, a 5th unit could be added. So if there's a possibility to add one in a basement or a 3rd floor, this lot could accommodate it. More suburban area on Mohawk Drive. This is in the SRV1 district. And this has to do with the dispersion requirement that I mentioned. So in today's code, the addition of a 3rd unit to this building would require a conditional use process because there are other 3-unit buildings within 300 feet of it. And so, by removing that dispersion requirement, there's ample space on this property to construct a 3rd unit as a permitted use. Here's a smaller project on Atwood Avenue that did not move forward, but was approved a few years ago in the Traditional Shopping Street District. It's a 9-unit building on a small lot, about a 5,000 square foot lot. And with very small design changes, a building of this scale would become a permitted use based on that lot size. This is a building under construction today. Commonwealth Development is doing this out on Raymond Road, an 11-unit mixed-use building in the neighborhood mixed-use district. The lot is 18,000 square feet, and something of this scale would become a permitted use with these changes. Really similar scale on Winnebago in the Traditional Shopping Street district. Again, this 11-unit mixed-use building would become a permitted use with these changes. This is an example up on the north side, up on Dryden Drive, right off of Northport in the city's Commercial Corridor Transitional District, CCT district. And it's a 4-story, 27-unit building, purely residential. It too would become a permitted use. So in the CCT district, you could pursue up to 36 units as a permitted use and up to 5 stories, which is the same as today. Important side note here, the height thresholds for conditional versus permitted have not been changed in this set of ordinance changes. Getting larger, a little bit larger here. Here's one on the 1100 block of South Park Street in the Traditional Shopping Street District, a 44-unit mixed-use building. And with small design changes, specifically the inclusion of just a little bit more commercial space, a building like this would become a permitted use in the TSS district because it is a mixed-use building. And an important side note here is that, if a developer would have wanted to pursue, let's say, 2 different 24-unit buildings instead of one larger mixed-use building, they could have that opportunity as well. And so, it would be possible to do even just on one single property, a 24-unit purely residential building in this district. And that avoids the need to aggregate properties that can take a lot of time and cost, especially for entry-level developers. Here's one on the far west side, out on Old Middleton Road in the neighborhood mixed use district. It's a 50 unit mixed use building. It does have 4 stories and over 24 units. And so those two things, the height and the fact that it's over 24 units, would necessitate a conditional use review still for this building. And again, the neighborhood mixed use district is our least intensive mixed use district from a practical standpoint. There's a recently approved project on Hammersley Road in the Commercial Corridor Transitional District, 53 units. And it would still be a conditional use based on the recent changes that were proposed by the Plan Commission to ratchet back the number of units in CCT that could be done by a permitted use. So this would still require conditional use approval. And then finally, this is a recently approved project on South Park Street again in the Commercial Corridor Transitional District. If it has 62 units and 4 stories. If it were only 60 units as a mixed use building, it too would be a permitted use in the CCT district. Now this is one that does lie within Urban Design District number 7. And so, it would still need Urban Design District review. But as far as the land use approval goes, it would be a permitted use if it only had 60 units. So I think that is a good sort of range from, again, the very small to the mid-scale that sort of demonstrates the scale of projects and how they might be impacted by these changes. Have those brought forth any other questions or thoughts to share?
You could do the emceeing yourself. This is great. You would keep without the bad jokes. Yes, we do have another question. So we do have time, probably 2 or 3 more questions. Next up is Bill Connors.
Yeah, well, Heather, you mentioned at the beginning that this has been held over, this proposed ordinance, to May 18th, and that you've got, a large number of new alders to try to get up to speed. And in addition, there appear to be some returning alders who are pretty strongly opposed to this ordinance. So it seems to me that there's going to have to be a fair amount of politicking that's going to have to go on to get this thing approved. I know that's not your area, your staff, that's the elected officials, but I certainly hope, I know the mayor strongly supports this, and I hope she will be, lighting up the phones with the new alders and existing alders to line up the votes for this. And we're going to be helping. There's a number of us that are very interested in helping with that effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think new alders and existing alders are eager to hear different perspectives on this. I know there are some concerns about how changes like this may quicken displacement, and so that's a real concern that I've heard, and we're trying to grapple with. I think the best we can do as a staff team is to continue to couch this in a much broader group of housing initiatives that the city's taking on. And, I feel it's a very, very important piece of the overall puzzle. But, I think we can say that with all of the funding that the city has dedicated to affordable housing, with our commitments to working, with the ACRE program, with land banking, et cetera, we really do have a full set of tools that can work together with changes like these to continue to support housing and affordable housing at the same time. So that's our hope.
Yeah, well, certainly the displacement issue is one thing that's being raised, but the other one, I know at least one alder is very much opposed to the idea of allowing, 100% multifamily buildings in much of the mixed use districts, because he wants there to be walkable neighborhoods with lots of ground floor commercial.
Yeah, it will continue to be a process where we'll hear a lot of different perspectives. And as staff, we're just going to continue to do our best to address questions and you know, find the data that alders need to make a good decision.
Excellent. Well, we are running up against time, but the chat is on fire. Heather, everyone's saying thank you for your work and thank you for what you're doing. We really do appreciate it. And I want you all to know that DMI has taken a supportive position on this resolution. We have been working with Bill. We've been working with the mayor's office to get through this. That work is going through the housing task force underneath this committee. So Ann, Katie Rice, Dan O'Callahan, and the team are moving there. But we obviously will be in touch. We would like your help to make sure that we can get this resolution past the post.
And I want to thank DMI for really stepping out of the downtown on this. I mean, I think that goes without saying. It's a citywide issue, as you can see on the maps. It doesn't pertain explicitly to the downtown area, but I think DMI's interest is just really important, and I want to thank you for the time and energy on it. So thanks for having me today.
Absolutely, Heather. Thank you as always. Any last words, Anne?
No, but I just wanted to thank you for that last comment, Heather, about stepping out of downtown. I think as a community, DMI increasingly is interested in strengthening, you know, all of Madison. And I hoped today, and I know we just ran out of time, that maybe you would touch on some of the South Side planning efforts, but that's something that we want to watch and we want to support as well. So thank you for that. And thanks for coming today. And thank you all for joining us. And remember that you have options to join EDC stuff basically tomorrow, Monday, and a lot of times in the near future. So I think things are really reopening, but in the meantime, we're going to have a lot of content from EDC. So I hope you all will join us.
Absolutely. And one quick other note too, we do have, just as Ann brought up, we have Ruben Anthony and the Black Business Hub at next month's meeting in May. So lots of great stuff. Check us out, Nosh at noon tomorrow and next Monday for the Core Spaces project. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Jason.
Have a great day, everybody.